introduce Alex Feltus and Claris Castillo for SciDAS, the National Cyber Infrastructure for Scientific Data Analysis at Scale. So we are now looking into the future here. Claris is a senior computational and network systems researcher at the Renaissance Computing Institute here at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And Alex is an associate professor in Clemson University's Department of Genetics and Biochemistry and CEO of ALLO, I got that right? Symposium? Allele? Allele, thank you. So SciDAS is designed to improve flexibility and accessibility to national resources, helping researchers more effectively use a broader array of these resources. SciDAS is developed using large-scale systems biology and hydrology data sets, but is extensible to many other domains. So with that, I'll hand it over to Alex and Claris.
Hey, so Claris is controlling the slide, and I put some animation here, so we'll see what happens with it. But so we're a recently funded NSF project, Scientific Data Analysis at Scale, SciDAS or SciDAS. We haven't even gotten to the point now, since we started in February, to decide on how to pronounce our own acronym. So we're really new. But primarily what this is an end-user-driven project where we're trying to build, we're using a lot of experimental tools, we're trying to build production systems to be able to do what the NSF is doing and actually generate usable scientific results. And so one of the big problems we're trying to solve is that even scientists who are very geeky and understand how to use high-performance computing and things like that, they're having trouble processing their own DNA. This is me. I'm one of these people. I'm an end user, and we're constantly trying to figure out why our nodes aren't working, why our jobs are failing. You know, we're dealing with, I have 150 terabytes of data, and we fill it up instantly by trying to deal with some of these practical issues. Next one. Is it the next?
I am clicking what I'm supposed to be clicking. Did I do it? No.
Yeah. So there, people are having problems processing their data from a data perspective. Like again, myself and a lot of my colleagues. And then there's people that are building these amazing systems that I really didn't know much about until a few years ago, other than just using whatever my campus had to be able to process data. These amazing systems, ranging from, well, Claris will talk about some of the systems that we use. But I found that a lot of times we don't know what these systems are as scientists. They're not marketed very well. Sometimes they don't really fit my needs. And one thing I don't have up here is sometimes it's just like I don't really know how to get access to the systems. Do I have to, what hoops do I have to go through? And sometimes that keeps me from using them. So next slide. And so a solution to this, the way we wrote this proposal is to embed active end users, like some of the people that are PIs and co-PIs on this proposal. We're trying to process data at the tera and petascale. Petabyte scale, looking at it from an end user perspective, that's how much raw data I have to go through the whole system. And then embedding those on software design teams with cyber infrastructure developers, like we're working with RENCI, and these agile design teams. So what we're doing is we're sharing our destiny on NSF reports, and really, we're developing the system while we're building it. Next slide. And so what we're doing to be able to do this on the design team is, for the cyber infrastructure component, is gluing systems together to allow us to discover domain data, move it fluidly across networks, be able to launch scientific workflows in the way that a scientist is comfortable doing, even if it's not the best way, and improve the flexibility and access to national and global resources. This is our solution to this problem. And I should mention this, I didn't say this at the very beginning, is that this is an NSF-funded project. And this is Clemson, RENCI at Chapel Hill, and Washington State Universities are the primary foci. But we're collaborating with people already around the country. Next slide. So again, this is end user focused. We're trying to have the end user embedded and stress test the system. And a big part of this is that I find that using big data sets in genomics, which is what I do, is genomics and genetics, the general purpose systems don't always function the way you expect them to, and the networks that move data around it as well. Next slide. Just keep going. I put these dumb animations in here. And so this is what the concept here is that we have already on the team systems biologists, hydrologists. These are sort of our primary use cases for stress testing. We have an education person doing education analytics. A lot of plant biologists. I do a lot of plant biology work, so I have a lot of friends in this domain. Genomicists, bioinformaticists. We have some space biologists, but also some people that are interested in looking at the Earth from space, from image analysis. We're really marrying these people with people like to work at RENCI, and also people that work in technical people at Internet 2 and a lot of partners, the computer scientists and network engineers, storage engineers, the visualization people, the HCI people. We're really trying to bring all of this together into one, trying to create a village to be able to get some work done. Next slide. And so there's the concept of, if you build it, they will come. We're trying to change that concept here to they will help build it while using it. And so here's our little construction of a baseball field so we can all play together. The network engineer and the geneticist, where they're going to go have lunch together after they're done mowing the lawn and constructing the field. We're really trying to do this and trying to alleviate the problem of building a massive system that is great, right? But it doesn't get quite advertised correctly and doesn't get utilized to its full potential. We're trying to do that. And I should say, as a user, we're really trying to respect the inefficient, unoptimized habit space of the domain scientists. That's if you don't do it that way, you can turn scientists off because they don't want to change their bad habits. Next slide. And so for stress testing, I'm a biologist, and a big part of the data that we're running through the system as we develop it is biological. And this is just this was taken yesterday, a snapshot of the data that's in one repository, the NCBI Sequence Read Archive in Maryland, which is hooked up to Internet 2, and we move data through Internet 2 into our systems right now. I've been doing this for years, actually. But it just capped the magic 10 quadrillion 8 T's and C's base pairs that have been developed with a new, or not new, 8-year-old sequencing technology that's really just generates huge data sets. You can see this is an exponential curve. This is a lot of data, and a base pair is a byte, and so you can look at this as petabytes, over 10 petabytes of data that have been generated. And I see this as hitting exabytes. If it hasn't already, it's just not in this repository. If it's out there. And I think I saw in John's slide that there was 112 petabytes moved across Internet 2 in 2016. So I got that right. You can have a very small number of scientists moving this data around and mining it and meeting that capacity just from this one repository. So there's a lot of data that needs to be crunched. Next slide. Oh yeah, and so the biologists, I got stacks of hard drives in my office that I've used received from colleagues to process their data. You can't do that anymore. Next slide. And so one of the stress tests, we're trying to develop biological results while we're using the system. In my lab and Stephen Ficklin at Washington State University, a colleague, and some other people, we are generating gene interaction patterns. We build these graphs of gene interactions, and this picture here shows the little dots are genes, and a line between them are gene interactions. And we process that 10 petabytes of data at NCBI. That's a big place where we draw from in other places too to be able to pull in to generate these kind of networks. And so this is a massive computational problem to do. And so we're really stress testing it from an algorithmic and just raw data perspective in what we're doing. Next slide, please. And so we're really trying to just kind of get ridiculous here and see how much we can stress test the system. Where we're trying to, I focus on a lot of plants and sort of a human perspective too, and really trying to branch out into the tree of life and pull big data sets from different nodes on the tree of life, different organisms. And there's some numbers here showing you, like, this is actually pretty dated, that there's 38 terabytes of green plant raw data that we can process. We probably, right now, if we were to start processing the raw data, we'd be generating, 3 petabytes or so of intermediate files, and we don't have that kind of storage, and we're trying to deal with how to process this, and just seeing how far we can push the envelope. When we're generating this data too, this is sort of the model with the grant, we're going to be publishing the gene interaction patterns that are of interest to different groups of scientists, from plant biologists to medical scientists, that could be mined for information. Next slide. And this is, we're going to detail here, but this is where a lot of the workflows that the comfort zone for my group is where we've been developing Pegasus workflows that run on the Open Science Grid. The Open Science Grid has allowed us to really scale up from our pretty robust data center here at Clemson. We can branch out into exceed resources as well. But we already have robust workflows like this one that generates gene expression matrices, Pegasus workflows, that are functional on OSG that we're going to be testing in NSF Cloud instances like Chameleon and Cloud Lab, and then really moving to OSG for production purposes, and using Internet 2 as a big data mover for our data. Next slide. And so we're not just about biology. The two main foci for the project are the genomics biology community and the hydrology community. And so there's a project called HydroShare, which is really exciting to me because I'm still learning about what it is, since I'm not a hydrologist. But this is a project that's ending pretty soon from the NSF, and there's a really cool data repository, the hydroshare.org, that they built to store all sorts of data sets. This is a collaboration for many different universities, and we're seeing if we can't find some cross-pollination between the disciplines with this, but also be able to engage HydroShare, learn from what they've done in their database, but also be able to use add some more data crunching power to HydroShare. And so there's many aspects to it, and to HydroShare, and it's a really cool resource. And so we're seeing how we can further enable this. Next slide. I think this might be my last slide. Yeah, so that's just the end user perspective on things, and just to pass this over to the people who know things that I don't know. Here's Claris.
Hello, everyone. Well, I think RENCI probably doesn't need introduction, but at RENCI, we advance the data science infrastructure to enable scientists like Alex at Clemson and Stephen and Washington State University and the hydrologists behind HydroShare to use data to drive innovation and do new discoveries. So in RENCI, we have, in the past year, with this goal of enabling science, we have developed multiple technologies and software tools. I'm going to be talking about the ones that are core and foundational to SciDAS, and some of the projects that also are going to be foundational to the system that we have started to build and develop to meet Alex and the biology community needs. So to start, two of our core foundational technologies are first, there's SciDAS, which is an open source software that provides tools to manage data from acquisition to archival and reuse through all life cycle, and has been widely adopted by the government, the industry, and the academia. And it's also the backend on some other prominent CI efforts like CyBERS, used to be iPlant. We have then also Orca and Exogeny. Orca is a control framework that was developed in collaboration with Duke to orchestrate resources across federated resource providers, and these resource providers could be cloud providers or network providers like Internet 2. And currently, it runs in Exogeny, is the engine of Exogeny, a Genie testbed spanning more than 20 sites and more than 20 network providers. And in Exogeny, Orca allows scientists to create virtual infrastructure slices tailored, customized to their needs, bringing together compute resources, storage resources, network, all connected through layer 2 networking and distributed across multiple cloud providers around the nation and internationally, actually. So when we have these two foundational technologies, what we have is the ability to build software infrastructure like the one we try to depict in this figure, in where the scientists have this very customized virtual infrastructure spanning cloud like Chameleon, Exogeny, and are able to do their science. One of the main the key networking capabilities that we developed under the ORCA and SciDAS umbrella, and that we're going to be using in SciDAS is the ability to stitch to external resources like HPC machines or data repositories like NCBI to further empower the scientists to do their science. Another foundational project behind SciDAS is Adamant. This is a project in where we integrate, it's an NSF-funded project that completed more than a year ago. But in this project, we integrated Pegasus, the workflow management system developed by ISI and USC, with ORCA to demonstrate that scientific applications could dynamically trigger changes in the infrastructure to adapt to changes in the workload. Like, for example, if a scientific workflow needed to retrieve or transfer data from an external data repository or needed to scale out, we could dynamically, the workflow itself, the scientific application, could dynamically instantiate network links to enable that data transfer. And as you remember, Alex, the scientific workflows that we're going to be using to drive this project are Pegasus scientific workflows currently running in OSG. The second project, which is in the same vein of the previous one, is it's currently running, and it's also an NSF project in where we integrated IDOTs with ORCA. And by doing this, we're bridging the gap that exists between the data management layer and the infrastructure to explore optimization opportunities that are not possible with these two layers being separated. Like, for example, we demonstrated, and this was in supercomputing, that we could prioritize the traffic of or the transfer of certain data based on the metadata associated with the files. And this is what this integration of IDOS and ORCA enable, among many other SDN-based optimization techniques that we developed on the radii. And here we are facing the peta-scale challenge that Alex and Stephen have brought to us. We are going to be building and hardening these efforts, the previous efforts, to allow scientists like Alex to build collaborative infrastructure across a much more richer and complex ecosystem that will include Cloud Lab, TAG, Chameleon, OpenScience Grid, and Exogeny, and that will be tightly integrated with a wide area network data grid IDOTs that will be initially deployed in RENCI, Washington State University, and Clemson to meet the needs of the scientific applications of the biology community and the HydroShare community represented by HydroShare. We will also be extending these and creating new approaches so that we can provision containerized scientific applications. So now, in the past, we have been using virtual machines as the unit of deployment of scientific applications. That's the case for Exogeny, and is the case for Cloud Lab and Chameleon. We're going to be building new mechanisms so that instead we can containerize applications and run containers, which is obviously going to make the system more efficient, more portable, and we hope it's going to take us to the next level of the system in the system side infrastructure efforts that we're familiar with. And this figure sort of is a 10,000 feet view. We have started this project just like a month ago, so we have been in heavy discussions on what we should be doing and how we would do it. But the high level looks like this. We are enabling layer 2 connectivity between NCBI and all these various cyber infrastructure efforts through Exogeny. And we're going to be supporting the compute and data needs of Tripal, which is, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, is a software infrastructure effort led by Washington State University and Clemson to serve the biology community, and that is currently deployed in more than 100 sites. So, and as HydroShare have needs to run or enable execute the computation against the data that they host, and we plan SciDAS, we hope to SciDAS to be the platform for that. And that's it. Sorry, we don't have a thank you slide. How is that possible? Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alex and Clarice. Do we have questions? Folks online, I'll give you a moment to unmute your phones.
So, I'm curious. So, this is either for Alex or Clarice. I guess it's interesting to me that what you've built to support the biology is seeming like it's going to be more generally applicable. I mean, do you see this? So you've got sort of the genomics community as well as the hydrology community. Any thoughts beyond that in terms of what you might be able to support with this?
I guess I can answer that. So we do have some other people too that are we're just getting started. We're 6 weeks into it. We have a few people that we're actually supporting right now, and a lot of these are cases that I understand what their pain points are, and I'm talking to other people outside of my domain to find out what their pain points are, and I listen to what's happening at media hubs and internet team meetings and things like that, trying to find broader people. We're trying to focus it on hydrology and genomics, but we will be going outside and looking for opportunities to generalize it whenever possible.
Yeah.
If I may add, from the cyber infrastructure point of view, we're really designing the system to be extremely generic. Like, for example, if you look at the top of the architecture, we're looking at enabling the provision of containers, and whatever is within those containers is completely immaterial to the infrastructure. And SciDAS is also a generic platform for hosting data, so the system is by design generic to serve the broader community. The only
that's great.
specific scientific will be tripod and hydroshare, which are effectively users of the system.
Interesting.
Hey, Clarice.
Yeah, I think it's great, Clarice. I'd be very interested in probably some further conversations about just as I was pointing out, we're looking at what our next investment's going to be. So, Alex and I have already started this conversation. It'd be great to kind of bring you in on it. So.
Hey, Clarice, it's Stan. So one thing that this conversation has kind of, I don't know, germinated in my brain.
Uh-oh.
No. I mean, so, we have for a long time talked about trying to create generic infrastructure, and I think we're doing a pretty good job of getting there. But yet, no matter how generic it is, I think inherent level of complexity of what we're trying to get done in creating the infrastructure for a community of science kind of almost requires these special people, these unicorns that John was talking about, that can help, the communities of science take advantage of generic but not personalized software. And so I'm wondering, I wonder if we could start, I don't know, thinking about, maybe is the right term to use, about how far you can go afield from, let's say you build something that works for a particular community. Like SciDAS I think has been quite successful, building an infrastructure for a community of science, and more than one community of science. So how, the question is, but yet in talking to Rob, the level of I'll call it hand-holding is quite extensive. So my question is there a way of, I'm not sure if Howard's still there, is there a way to do a Facebook similarity, friends map of scientists and science domains, so that we can think about how far a domain is from another domain to kind of get an idea of how hard it's going to be to migrate the cyber infrastructure? Do you see what I'm thinking about?
I do see it, and one of the things that Raj and I have thought about in our most optimistic moments with the data bridge is trying to build a map like that, right, that would be focused on the data sets. But, do I think it's going to be an easy thing to do? I don't.
Yeah, I think the data sets are a good place to start. That's a real good idea.
Yeah.
I think one model stand that we have too is that, so just to focus on the triple databases. So triple it's a technology it's a repository for storing genomic data, but it's built around lots of different like communities within the life science community that are, a lot of them are agricultural focused, and so it'll be like a tree community, and different. There's actually the insect I5K is there too, and I think that is a way to tether together the users through these repositories that they're already using, and then putting these tools, these air quoting generic tools, into their hands that meet their needs. So I think that there's ways to do that without trying to, you just kind of naturally go through from a repository perspective that human-computer interaction interface is out there. That's the way to build these. But I always bring this up, but I think that it's, defining the word community is a very difficult thing, especially when I think about biology. I mean, I've been in the biomedical groups and radically different agricultural genomics groups, and it's hard to define what that community is, to be able to draw that map.
Yeah, good point.
But this is Florence. That might be something that's an opportunity for the hubs over time, right? Because we're going to be seeing these different communities, and we're going to be trying to continue to enable cross-hub, cross-spoke, cross-whatever collaboration. It could be that we're able to build that map over time. It's just going to take time. But that could be an interesting objective for the hubs working together. What do you all think?
I had a follow-up. This is Jason at RENCI. I had a follow-up to Stan's question. So I heard about mapping, and we're talking about mapping data sets, and then we're talking about unicorns and the ability to well, the ability to sort of enable this science, and to me that sounds like more like mapping expertise than data sets themselves. If you have one specific community or practice that is using the infrastructure and they're quite successful, and you have perhaps a new community that is joining that does need that expertise, how are they going to find it specifically if it's not within their community?
Right.
So Jason, the reason I triggered on Howard's comment about the data sets and data bridge is that, at least naively, it seems to me that there may be some wisdom in looking at the artifacts that a community of science spins off, which could be viewed as these data science collections, or I'm sorry, data collections, as a kind of a fingerprint of the kind of science that's done. And so if there is a metric that allows you to say these two data collections are close, even though one's for neurotic psychologists and the other one is for left-leaning journalists, I'm just making this up, obviously. Maybe there's something to be said that there's I mean, I admit that the vocabulary, we haven't done anything to characterize the expertise. I fully admit that. I'm just saying we've got to use what breadcrumbs are available to us.
But if we're looking at systems like this, specifically we mentioned SciDAS, where the applications themselves are also artifacts within the system, we now have another thing that we can graph and map and track.
Yeah, very good point. So we could look at workflows. That's a really good point, that workflows that look similar to one another might indicate a kind of a similar process.
Alex, I'm sorry.
Sure.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
And I think, Alex, I think this cross-pollination that you talk about, right, that we're doing with the hydrologist community, we're getting Tamlin involved from UNC to also understand how these NASA mission have similar data set needs, similar data needs, right? So I think we could say safely that we're trying to understand how these two communities and their data needs and the type of data sets that they deal with are alike, and how they could use the system. Is that correct, Alex?
Yeah, and I think that I look at it, I think this is where this project I think we're in a good place. We can all work together, and that's the most important thing. But I look at everything from a data perspective, right? And I just hack through my years as a scientist, scaling up my research. And so I hear what you're saying about generalizing systems and software, but I look at ways to generalize the data. And so, like, in biology, it's pretty easy. We have the evolutionary tree to relate data together, and I would look at different triple database repositories and the NCBI as just different ways of aggregating data around the tree of life. And so from a domain scientist, biologist perspective, that's the way I would tether together the researchers is through the tree of life, evolutionary perspectives. And then, and kind of what we're doing, I have visions with SciDAS is mapping a lot of the cyber infrastructure to be able to look at complex gene interactions across the tree of life. You know, so it's like, it's not really a computer science perspective, it's completely a domain perspective, and I can see how far I can push that concept with, you know, mapping the cyber infrastructure back to it. Does that make any sense at all?
It does.
Stan, so this is Renee. So just to chime in a little bit on the discussion, and I can't say too much about it because we're still writing the proposal for it. And not that it's secret, it's just it's not fully baked yet. But one of the things that we're working on is rather than focusing on the underlying infrastructure or databases or repositories or a lot of heavy metadata, we're trying to build a resource as the first step of our BD map. So the hubs are all thinking about putting together different versions of in some coordinated manner of big data resource maps. So we're trying to do something that's as practical as possible with as little lift as possible. And what we're focusing on is the notion of domain experts posting their challenges, the problems that they're trying to solve along with the data, and trying to create interactions between them and data science teams. You know, frequently what happens, or machine learning teams or whatever, frequently what happens is data sets published and then you say, okay, go out and figure out what to do with this, data scientists, machine learning folks. So we're trying to do it the other way around to create an ongoing dialogue between the domain experts and the data scientists where the data is a central part of that dialogue. And then have the community start to create solutions on the data science or machine learning side that actually solve those problems. So this may be, as part of what everybody's been talking about, a way of starting to gather the data about what the different challenges are in the different domains, who are the types of folks who are asking for specific solutions, and then you can kind of map it to data sets and the underlying infrastructure.
That's helpful. So it kind of sounds to me like that what you're doing is kind of doing a very early chunk of what some people call the blackboard architectural model, where people post things up on this blackboard, and you know, they just basically add, you know, they share ideas, partial solutions, you know, things like that. And if you Google, in fact, Wikipedia's got a pretty good write-up about this. It's an old idea, but it's actually getting some traction again because, I think it's fairly old. I think it was published some years ago. But it's getting some traction because now with, you know, kind of smart APIs, you can start thinking about being able to post a solution and reach out to data in kind of a lightweight fashion. So it's almost like a mashup toward a solution.
Yeah, that's in fact the general direction that the thinking is going in. And I'm not sure if this is the first time I hear of the Blackboard architectural model. I'll have to ask the folks who are helping me put this together whether they know of the model, but that's good to know too. But you know, happy to fill you in once they've thought through it a little bit more, because it sounds like this is something that there are lots of moving pieces that maybe we can make complementary efforts to try to get at the whole.
Sounds good.
Hey, Stan, can I ask you a question about what you just said? When you say reaching out to the data, what do you mean? You mean to known data repositories? Or?
So a lot of what I'm saying is informed by my fairly recent experience with this NIH effort that has taken a kind of an odd turn, but it's an odd turn that I find particularly intriguing, and it is to kind of create, so it was proposed that there's 4 teams that are being funded across the country to try to pull together very disparate data sets and attack basically fundamental questions around human biology. And the idea was floated that let's treat like a Blackboard system where we post stuff, and we're not trying to provide answers or provide complete sources of knowledge or anything else. We're just going to let this kind of emerge over time. It's a real simple metaphor. And so the reason I'm saying you could reach out to the data is that we have a hackathon coming up fairly soon, and what we've been charged to do is to take all of the data sources we have and put them up behind an API, a smart API, and expose them, and then we're going to do queries across them. And so it's a really, I just find it an intriguing concept because it doesn't require me to do a lot of, I mean, I think it'll be inefficient, and it isn't what you'd want if you're trying to get answers fast to highly complex problems, but it does permit you to kind of start to assemble a lot of stuff without tying everybody down and getting the way you do it fully specified.
That's the general idea that we're going for, Stan. So we started to look at a lot of the different efforts, and as an example, very metadata intense efforts. Those, well, when they're up and running, then they're quite good solutions. But the challenge is getting them up and running, across each new domain, particularly if the domain is very different. So we're trying to think of a way of doing this that's much lighter, that really starts to give you some visibility into a particular domain and allows you to get the community to actually work to create the solutions together, and then decide where do you go from there, right? Rather than preconceiving where do you go to create the solution.
Exactly. In a lot of ways, it's analogous to this data lake concept that people have been bandying about recently, which is don't try to get all your data organized and into a central database. Just pour it all into receptacles that you can control, and eventually somebody will start working on some part of it, and that'll help inform something else. And in an emergent fashion, you'll start to organize the data. So this is kind of even more generalized, which says don't even put it in a receptacle. Just set up an API.
Yeah.
What's the API actually going to do?
Whatever you design it to do. I mean, if you design an API that does nothing but allow Census Bureau data from 2010 to 2016 to be revealed on a state-by-state basis, and you get 62,000 inquiries on household incomes, then you built a bad API. But you've learned from the API error. I don't know how it's going to work, Howard. It's completely free-form and half-baked.
Yeah. Is Jane involved?
No, she's not.
Have you looked at linked data? This is something that Mike Conway would immediately jump out and say. So I'm going to say it for him since he's not here, but this is where linked data comes in handy, because you can get sort of emergent annotations across data sets via the linked data specification, and with the appropriate tools, that allows your users to not only annotate, the data sets themselves, but the relationships between them, which may be handy.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because we were looking at different ways of allowing kind of light annotation. We were looking at an organization called Hypothesis that allows kind of web-based, web browser-based annotation.
Right.
So that's very helpful. Thanks.
Yeah, we studied a Hypothesis, and you might be interested in a thing called CEDAR as well if you're interested in them.
Great. CEDAR as in the tree.
Yeah, I believe it's at Stanford. Is that right? Anyone else know what I'm talking about?
That sounds familiar, but I'm not going to claim
Jason,
anything.
thank you for that tip. I've pulled up the Linked Data Platform 1.0 primer, so
Here we go.
I'll try to get smarter. That's a great tip.
Can I ask a question along these lines? So what do you, from an Internet of Things perspective, and I'm thinking about DNA sequencers, right? Because I kind of just focus on the biology. But what happens when every hospital, everywhere there's a blood test, or in every research lab is generating what Florence told me about the Bronto bytes of DNA sequence data that you're never going to be able to annotate, you're never going to be able to store. It's going to have to be ephemeral. There's just no way to keep it around. There aren't enough electrons, right? Like, how do these models fit into that when you're dealing with post-exabytes of data that is filled with valuable just healthcare information?
I think that's an existential question. And I don't mean to be facetious about it. I think it's very hard at this point to come to grips with the fact that we're going to be producing data. I mean, I think we're already there, that we're producing data that we're never going to look at. And how we hook that into something useful? Well, maybe there will emerge some kind of quantum storage device and we can put front ends on it or something. I just don't know. But you know what has been the most frustrating part of my career, which is getting long in the tooth, I guess, is that we always try to engineer things to work really, really well, and I'm inclined to try to figure out ways of getting things engineered to work in a half-assed fashion and hope it gets better.
I think that's where we're at.
Sort of the fuzzy.
Yeah, I think you're right. Excuse my language, by the way.
So Alex, that's a good point. I mean, that's like the new frontier that we're going to be dealing with. That's why the working group that you co-chair is distributed big data and analytics, is all this stuff, right? And we're going to have a lot to figure out over time.
Yeah, and it's not a, this is not a, I'm trying not to be, I don't think it's a science fiction problem or existential. It's that, like right now I've got 170 terabytes or something like that storage, and I need to process petabytes of data, and that's, you know, trying to go out to national compute to be able to do that. But I'm just one dude. What happens when there's like, you know, 100,000 people that need to do this? And I think it's something that, like, that's kind of what SciDAS is. What I want it to be is like kind of like getting at some of these concepts of like trying to do too much and being able to, what do you want to keep and what do you want to erase? Because you're never, I mean, that's what I love about internet too, is that I want to be able to have the data in a repository and then process it and delete it and not worry about having to download it again. Like that kind of experimental, you know, more ephemeral type experimentation.
Yeah, and I think collaborating with NIH and CBIT and those guys will be interesting over time as they get more into precision medicine, precision cancer care. But when they're trying to leverage all these different pieces of data, you know, clinical research from around the planet in 100 different languages that they use cognitive computing and AI to interpret and translate, and then put it with clinical research data, environmental and URPAG, plant and animal genomics data, all this stuff trying to come together to create context. That's going to be a journey we're all going to be going on, I think.
And I think this leads right into back to the linked data and then the metadata and the provenance. So you're going to have data sets that you can't keep because they're too big. You're going to process them, and then you're going to have results, and you're still going to need to know how you got to those results. And you basically have a shadow of the data that was that at some point you may need to go back and recreate.
And I think
or it may exist somewhere else. It's not all about you, not you in particular. You know that it's a distributed big data and analytics environment. That's part of the point.
And I think the semantics of the application here are also important because we need to have an understanding of the value of the data, right? Like what is data that you want to keep and how does it change? I mean, that is, it's a hard metric to compute depending on the domain size.
And it may be that we just have to start to be comfortable with more uncertainty. I mean, this is something in the data bridge, right? So we're trying to build, let's say we have 100,000 data sets and we build a network of them, okay? And we say to the users, okay, give us your data set and we'll give you the ones that we think are the most similar. But the problem is there's a dozen at least, or maybe more like 50 ways to define similarity. And there's no actual answer, right? There's no ground truth. Nobody knows. Nobody can look at 100,000 data sets and say, oh yeah, these are the ones that are most similar. If they could, then I'd move on and do something else.
So look at Google Search. Google Search has done it very successfully with much bigger data. So it should be doable.
But
you get a bunch
they
of
give
things
you
that they're accurately
they give you an answer. They don't necessarily give you the answer, right? And that's the thing you have to start to be comfortable with. And I think that's true in our project, and I think that's true with some of the issues you guys are raising. At some point, yeah, you're probably not going to have all the data. Yeah, you're probably not going to be able to do all the computation you want. And then the next question becomes, okay, but is what you can do useful? And so I think the answer, at least for us, has been we're going to try to maximize quote unquote usefulness, whatever that means, within the parameters of the resources we have. And you want to keep pushing that boundary forward for sure. But if you wait, if your idea is you're going to wait till it's done before you start doing useful work, I think you're going to be disappointed.
And this is, again, part of what we're trying to aim for. So we're again, this is a very light approach, so it's not nearly as scientifically rigorous, but we're trying to let the community decide whether a data set is useful or not, rather than trying to predetermine it by similarity measures, which seem very complex. So usefulness for us is, was it useful in solving the challenge that was posted with the data or not, or do you need to have different types of data or different data sets to solve that challenge?
Yeah. It's interesting now, that you, Jason, brought up linked data, because it's linked data and page ranking, the fundamental algorithms that have enabled Google to do what it does, because the data, because the web pages are linked, and they can be ranked based on the popularity, which is a metric of success, of usefulness. It kind of suggests that perhaps, which is what you brought first, right, that the data set, if they are brought into a linked data model, then you can just apply the techniques that are being developed in computer science to do the next Google, the next Google search, but to apply exactly the same algorithm that Google search use to provide you with when you look for something, provide you with a list of hits that are, most of the time, at least my experience, rank in a way that makes sense. So if you take all these data sets to the web and you use web technology, then your problem is solved. It should be solved.
I'm not so sure. By the way, I just read the original Google paper this morning.
The PageRank?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a fascinating.
Well, I didn't read the PageRank paper. There's two papers. There's the original. There's the PageRank paper that's just page, and then there's the Brin and Page paper that introduced Google. It starts. The first words are we introduced Google.
And it's amazing. I mean, if a data set is, gets a lot of publication that is used, that immediately increases rank.
Right.
And, it seems that it's applicable.
But I think it's not that it's not completely inapplicable. It's just that, the PageRank algorithm depends on the fact that the links and the anchors are there, right? But when you're talking about 100,000 or 200,000 disconnected data sets, there isn't necessarily anything that connects them to each other. It's just not there, and even most.
I'm not ready to have that conversation, but just keep in mind that the internet is a lot of data. Yeah, it's a lot of data.
I actually there's a much bigger conversation around this that apparently NIH had and went off and built the whole system and didn't follow it. But I actually am connecting with the Google person who suggested what you're talking about, and I'm going to follow up with you on that. Okay. It is 4:30, so we'll take one last comment or question, and then we're going to close for the day. All right. With that. Thank you all. I think this has been the liveliest conversations on a late Friday afternoon in a while. So I want to thank also our fantastic speakers, and Carl will be sending out information about the next infrastructure working group.
Well done. Thanks, folks.
So we will have Amazon data science team presenting, as well as Microsoft will be talking about Azure, because we are now opening up the competition for the Hub Azure credit.